Sign it." Vanessa slapped the document onto the edge of his hospital bed, the man she claimed to love lying motionless machines breathing for him. "He can't hear you," Lucas said from the doorway, smiling. She straightened her dress. "I know." Neither of them noticed the maid in the corner, the quiet woman wringing out a cloth, eyes down, hands steady, who had just heard everything. And neither of them knew that the man in that bed had heard it too. Every single word. If this kind of story moves you, subscribe right now, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The call came at 6:47 in the morning. Not to the paramedics, not to a hospital. It came to a private physician, a man whose number only 12 people in Chicago had, and whose entire career had been built on discretion, silence, and the kind of medical knowledge that money could quietly purchase. His name was Dr. Emil Voss, and when his phone rang that Tuesday morning, he already knew it was Adrian before he even looked at the screen. "It's time," Adrian said. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who had planned every detail of his own disappearance from the world. Dr. Voss exhaled. "Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." 23 minutes later, Adrian Whitmore collapsed in the dining room of his penthouse. His personal chef was the first to see it. The man screamed, dropped an entire pan of food, and rushed to Adrian's side. Two security guards burst in from the hallway. One of them grabbed a phone. The other dropped to his knees beside his boss. "Mr. Whitmore? Mr. Whitmore, can you hear me?" Adrian did not move. He did not flinch. He lay there perfectly limp, his eyes closed, his breathing so shallow it was nearly invisible. 11 years of controlled discipline, years of learning to hold his face like stone, came down to this single moment. He felt the guard's hands on his shoulders. He felt the cold floor beneath his cheek. He felt everything, and he said nothing. By the time Vanessa Caldwell arrived at the private hospital wing, Adrian had already been intubated, monitored, and placed in a room that only 3 staff members were cleared to enter. She came in wearing silk, her hair perfectly arranged, her expression already performing the role of devastated fiancée. She pressed a hand over her mouth when she saw him. "Oh, God," she breathed. "Oh, Adrian." Dr. Voss stepped forward. "Ms. Caldwell, thank you for coming so quickly." "What happened?" "They said he just collapsed." "Neurological event," Voss said carefully. "We're running tests. At this stage, we're classifying it as a deep, unresponsive state. He is stable, but—" He paused. "We don't know when or if he'll wake up." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Perfect tears. The kind that came exactly when they were supposed to. "Can I sit with him?" "Of course." She pulled a chair close to his bed. She took his hand in hers. She looked at his face with an expression that could only be described as grief, raw, real heartbreaking. And then when she was sure Dr. Voss had stepped out of the room, she pulled out her phone, scrolled to a contact labeled simply LW, and sent one message: "It's confirmed. Move forward." Lucas Whitmore was Adrian's stepbrother by way of a complicated family history that neither man had chosen and neither man had ever fully accepted. He was charming in the way that empty rooms are charming, lots of space, no real warmth. He had spent 15 years living in Adrian's shadow and smiling through every single minute of it. When he arrived at the hospital, he shook hands with the nurses, nodded respectfully at the security posted outside Adrian's room, and asked very calm, very reasonable questions about Adrian's prognosis. "And the power of attorney?" he asked Dr. Voss so quietly that the question barely registered as anything other than concern. "That would be a legal matter," Voss said. "Of course." Lucas smiled. "I just want to make sure my brother is protected, that's all." He was in the hospital for 40 minutes. He never once went inside the room. The maid's name was Na Hayes. She was 34 years old. She had worked on the private hospital wing for 6 years. She was not assigned to Adrian's room, not officially. But on the second morning, one of the regular staff called in sick, and the charge nurse sent Na to cover. She knocked quietly before she entered. She did her work carefully, wiping the surfaces, changing the water in the small bedside pitcher, adjusting the position of his blanket so it lay flat instead of bunching at his side. She moved like someone who understood that silence in a room like this was not emptiness. It was weight. Before she left, she paused at the foot of his bed. "I don't know if you can hear anything," she said. Her voice was low, unhurried. "But I always talk to my patients anyway. My grandmother told me the ears are the last thing to go. She said the dying always hear more than we think." She looked at him. "You look like a man who's used to holding everything together," she said. "You can rest. It's okay to rest." And then she left. Adrian lay in the silence she left behind. He had not expected that. He had not expected any of it. On the third day, Vanessa brought her attorney. She introduced him to Dr. Voss as a family friend, which was technically true in the same way that a shark is technically a fish. His name was Gerald Penn, and he had spent 30 years building a reputation for finding legal pathways through situations that most people assumed had no exits. "We just want to understand the options," Vanessa told Voss, her voice soft with worry, "in case things don't improve." "What kind of options are you considering?" Voss asked. "Continuity," she said. "For the business, for his estate, he would want everything protected." Penn nodded gently. "We're talking about guardianship procedures, medical proxy authority, standard in situations like this." Dr. Voss looked at them both for a moment. "I understand," he said. "I'll have my office send you the relevant documentation." What he didn't say, what no one in that room said out loud, was that Adrian had heard every word of that conversation through the small audio relay that had been carefully installed in the room's ventilation system 3 days before his staged collapse. In his bed, his breathing did not change, but his jaw tightened just slightly beneath the thin hospital sheet. "They moved faster than I thought," he said. It was 11 at night. Dr. Voss sat in a chair beside the bed. The monitor sounds were real. The IVs were real. The secrecy was real. Only the unconsciousness was not. "Vanessa brought Penn on day 3, Voss said quietly. "I expected day 5, maybe 6. Adrian opened his eyes briefly, just for a moment staring at the ceiling. "She must have had him on standby," he said. "She was ready before I even collapsed." He closed his eyes again. "That tells me everything I need to know about the last 2 years. And Lucas? Lucas is careful. He'll let Vanessa do the heavy lifting and position himself to catch whatever falls." A pause. "He always has." Dr. Voss was quiet for a moment. "How long do you intend to continue this?" "Until I hear what I need to hear." Adrian's voice was flat, final. "Or until I've heard enough." By the 4th day, Na Hayes was back. Another staff absence, genuinely coincidental this time, and she was reassigned to Adrian's room for the afternoon shift. She cleaned. She checked the machines out of careful habit. She straightened the room with the quiet efficiency of someone who found dignity in the work itself, and then she sat down briefly in the chair beside his bed. "My son is 12, she said, as though continuing a conversation they had already started. "He asked me this morning why people get sick. I didn't have a good answer for him." She folded her hands in her lap. "I told him that sometimes the body just needs to stop, that it's not giving up, it's asking for help." She looked at Adrian's face. "I think people are like that too, not just bodies. People." She paused. "Sometimes the strongest ones are the ones who've never once been allowed to ask for help, and the body just does it for them." She stood, smoothed the blanket one more time, and left. In the corridor outside, she passed Vanessa without a word. Vanessa didn't look at her. Inside the room, Adrian's hand had moved just slightly against the sheet. The conversation he heard on the 5th day nearly broke his restraint entirely. Vanessa was on the phone. She thought she was alone. She stood by the window, speaking in the clipped, efficient tone she used when she was dealing with logistics, the same tone she used with caterers, with travel agents, with anyone whose job was to make her life run smoothly. "I'm not asking you to rush anything," she said. "I'm asking you to have it ready. There's a difference." A pause. "The Meridian property, yes. And the Lake Shore accounts. Those need to be restructured before any formal proceedings." Another pause. I know. But he's not going to wake up Gerald. His own doctor said neurological events of this severity rarely reverse. We need to be realistic." She turned slightly, checked that the door was closed, and lowered her voice. "Lucas has already agreed to a 40-60 split. We discussed it last night. I get operational control of the primary holdings. He gets the subsidiary interests and the offshore accounts. It's clean, it's fast, and frankly, it's what Adrian would have wanted the business protected. She laughed softly. It was a laugh Adrian had never heard from her before. Light, unguarded, relieved. "I know," she said. "I know. I just want it done." He lay there for a long time after she left the room. He had been a powerful man for a long time. He had built things from almost nothing. He had made decisions that moved money, people, and power in ways that most men never got close to. He had survived things that should have ended him. But he had never felt what he felt in that moment. It wasn't rage. Rage he knew. Rage was clean, directional, useful. This was something quieter and far more devastating. This was the recognition that for 2 years he had slept beside someone who was already measuring the distance between his death and her next beginning. That evening, Na came in for a late supply check, a routine task, mundane, nothing significant. She wasn't supposed to stay long, but she noticed the blanket had slipped again, and she fixed it, and then as she had done every other time, she paused. "You know what I think about when I'm in here," she said, not quite to him, not quite to herself, just into the room the way people speak when they've stopped performing and started actually thinking out loud. "I think about my father. He was in a bed like this once, different hospital, much worse machines." She was quiet for a moment. "We talked to him every single day. We didn't know if he heard us. We just couldn't stand the idea that he was in there alone." She looked at Adrian's face, at the stillness of it. "I hope someone talks to you," she said. "I hope you know you're not alone in here." She picked up her supplies. She moved toward the door, and then very softly, almost inaudibly, as though the words were not really meant for anyone, she added, "You matter, just as a person, not as anything else, just you." The door closed behind her. In the room, the monitors beeped steadily, and Adrian Whitmore, the most powerful man in Chicago, lay in his manufactured silence, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, felt something crack open behind his ribs. Not the plan, not the strategy, something older than that, something he had buried so deep he had almost forgotten what it felt like. By the time the 6th day came, Vanessa no longer came into the room to hold his hand. She came to make phone calls near the window where the signal was better. The 7th day started like all the others. Machines beeping, morning light coming through the blinds, a nurse doing a routine check at 6 a.m. sharp. But something had shifted in Adrian Whitmore. Not in his body. His body remained perfectly still, perfectly convincing. No, the shift was somewhere deeper. Somewhere behind the eyes that no one in that room knew were fully, completely open behind their closed lids. He had spent 6 days listening, 6 days cataloging voices, tones, pauses, the specific texture of people's silences. He had heard Vanessa laugh on the phone in a way she had never once laughed with him. He had heard Lucas rehearse casual concern the way an actor rehearses blocking. He had heard lawyers speak about his life the way contractors speak about a demolition site efficiently, without sentiment, focused only on what could be salvaged and what needed to come down. And then there was Na. He kept coming back to Na. Not because she was extraordinary in any visible way. She wasn't loud. She didn't make speeches. She didn't perform her kindness the way Vanessa performed her grief, with precise timing and careful audience awareness. Na simply was. She moved through his room the way honest people move through the world, without calculation, without an angle, without a single moment that felt rehearsed. And it was making him feel something he hadn't felt in so long that he'd almost stopped believing he was still capable of it. It was making him feel ashamed. Not of the plan. The plan had already proven itself justified 10 times over. He was ashamed of something older, the recognition that he had built a life so armored, so transactional, so defined by power and leverage and control, that the only person who had treated him like a human being in the past 7 days was a woman who cleaned floors for a living and owed him absolutely nothing. That thought sat in his chest like a coal. Hot, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. He was still sitting with it when the door opened and Vanessa walked in at 9 a.m., already on her phone, already mid-sentence. "I understand the timeline, Gerald, but the judge's schedule doesn't care about our timeline, so figure it out." She snapped the phone down, exhaled, and stood at the foot of the bed. She looked at him the way people look at a piece of furniture they're deciding whether or not to move. Then she straightened up and said to no one in particular, "This is taking too long." She left 11 minutes later without once touching his hand. Adrian counted those 11 minutes. Every single one. Na came in at noon. She wasn't alone this time. A younger aide named Priya trailed behind her new to the wing, still learning the protocols. Na was showing her how to log the machine readings without disturbing the patient, where to stand, how to move quietly, how to exist in a room like this without filling it with unnecessary noise. "You never act like they're already gone," Na told Priya, keeping her voice low. "Even when it looks that way, you treat them like they're still in there, because they usually are more than people think." Priya glanced at Adrian. "Does it bother you, talking to them when they can't respond? He might be able to respond?" "Nah," said simply. "We just can't see it." Priya lowered her voice further. "I heard one of the nurses saying his fiancée is already talking to lawyers, like about his estate." A pause. "I heard that too," Na said. "That doesn't bother you, that she's just moving on, while he's right here?" Na was quiet for a moment. She finished logging the reading. She capped the pen. "It bothers me," she said, "but it's not my place to say anything about it." She looked at Adrian's face just briefly, just a glance, but the kind of glance that carries actual weight. "What's my place is to make sure that whoever he is in there, he knows this room is safe. That's it. That's all I can do." Priya looked at him again. Something crossed her face. Something young and unguarded and real. "That's actually really sad," she said quietly. "Yes," Na agreed. "It is." They finished their work and left. Adrian lay in the silence they left behind, and he thought about the word safe. He tried to remember the last time anyone had described a space around him as safe. He tried to remember the last time he had felt it. He couldn't. The call between Vanessa and Lucas happened at 2:15 that afternoon. They didn't meet in person, too visible, too easy to misread, but the audio relay caught every word with perfect clarity, and Dr. Voss played it back for Adrian that night in the careful, quiet way he delivered all difficult information without editorializing, without softening, without looking away. Lucas had spoken first. "Penn says we need the second medical opinion on record before we can file. One doctor's assessment isn't enough for a guardianship claim." "I know that," Vanessa said, impatient. "I've already reached out to Dr. Harlow. He owes Adrian a favor, or rather he owed Adrian a favor. I think the circumstances make him more flexible now." Flexible meaning he'll sign off on permanent incapacity. Flexible meaning he'll assess honestly, and will make sure the assessment lands where we need it to land. A pause. "Don't make me explain everything twice, Lucas. I just want to know we're protected. We're protected when this is finished, not before. So stop asking me about protection and start making sure your people are ready on the board side, because the moment guardianship is established, I'm going to need those votes within 48 hours. Lucas was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted something underneath it. Something careful. "You know, sometimes I wonder if he suspected something." Vanessa's response came without a single beat of hesitation. "He never suspects anything," she said. "That's always been his problem. He thinks power protects him. He thinks money protects him." A short, almost affectionate laugh. He never understood that the most dangerous people in his life were already inside the house. The recording ended. Dr. Voss set the device down on the table between them and said nothing. Adrian lay with his eyes open. He didn't bother keeping them closed anymore during these nightly briefings, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. "She's going after Harlow," he said finally. "Yes." "Harlow will fold. He has too much to lose if I'm conscious and functional and angry." He paused. "Which means they're going to have a second opinion on record within, 4 days? 3 if she moves quickly, which she will. Then I have 3 days. 3 days for what?" Voss asked carefully. Adrian was quiet. Then, "To decide how much more I need to hear." Voss looked at him steadily. "And how much more do you need?" Adrian said nothing, which was in itself an answer. The 8th day brought Richard Whitmore. Adrian's father arrived without announcement, which was the only way Richard did anything, because Richard believed that announced arrivals gave people time to prepare their faces, and Richard had spent 60 years refusing to let anyone prepare their face before he saw it. He was 71. He walked with a cane he didn't need, had never needed, and used it primarily as a prop for thinking and occasionally emphasis. He came into the room, looked at his son in the bed, and sat down heavily in the chair beside him. He didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "I know you can hear me." The room was silent. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know my own son," Richard continued. "I've watched you play dead since you were 8 years old and trying to avoid piano lessons. You always did it the same way too still. Real sleep moves, real unconsciousness shifts. You're holding yourself like a soldier." A pause. "I'm not going to blow your cover, that's your business." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "But I want you to know something, and I want you to hear it straight, so listen carefully." His voice dropped. Not softer, quieter. "There's a difference. Vanessa has been to my house twice in the last week. She brought flowers. She cried. She told me she doesn't know how she'll manage without you." He paused. "And every time she came, she asked me one question, casual, buried under other things, but always the same question. She asked me whether I'd updated my own estate documentation recently." A beat of absolute silence. "She's not just after your empire," Richard said. "She's after everything with the Whitmore name on it. Yours, mine, the whole structure." Another pause. "I'm not afraid of her. I want you to know that. I've dealt with worse than Vanessa Caldwell, and I've dealt with worse than Lucas, and I'm still sitting here with this ridiculous cane." He tapped it once on the floor. "But I am concerned about you, not about the business. About you." He sat back. "The maid," he said. "The one who comes in around noon. I passed her in the hallway yesterday. She didn't know who I was, didn't treat me like the father of anyone important. Just nodded, said good afternoon, asked if I needed directions to the family waiting area." He made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but something adjacent to one. "I can't remember the last time someone just asked me if I needed help with something simple." He looked at his son. "Pay attention to that," he said. "Whatever else is happening in this room, pay attention to that." He stood slowly, picked up his cane. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said. "And I'll keep pretending I don't know what you're doing, because Lord knows you've never once taken my advice before, and I see no reason to start expecting it now." He walked to the door, then he stopped without turning. "But for the record," Richard Whitmore said, "I think you've seen enough." The door closed, and Adrian, for the first time in 8 days, almost smiled. Nah, came in late that evening, close to 8, to do a final check before the night shift took over. She moved through her routine. She logged the readings, she replaced the water, and then she sat down just for a moment, just briefly, the way she always did. Not out of protocol, out of something else, something that didn't have a formal name in a hospital handbook. "I had a hard day," she said quietly. Not to him exactly, just out loud into the space between them. "Priya asked me today whether this kind of work ever gets to me, whether I ever take it home." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know how to answer that, because the honest answer is yes. Of course it does. You sit with someone who's somewhere in between, and you can't help but wonder who they are outside of this room, what they care about, what they'd say if they could just say something." She looked at her hands. "I looked you up," she said, flat, honest, not apologetic. "I know who you are, Adrian Whitmore. I know what you do, what you run." A beat. "And I want you to know that none of that changes how I show up in this room. You're a person. Before any of the rest of it, you're just a person in a bed, and that's how I'm going to treat you." She stood. She smoothed the blanket the way she always did, one clean, careful motion from left to right. "I hope you come back," she said. "Whoever you are in there, I hope you find your way back." She left. In the hallway, Vanessa was arriving for what had recently become her evening visit, not to sit with him, but to use the private family consultation room 2 doors down for a call she didn't want overheard in a less controlled space. The two women passed each other. Vanessa didn't look up. Na stepped aside without a word. And behind the closed door of room 7, Adrian Whitmore lay in his bed and made a decision. Not about the plan, not about the timeline, about himself. He decided that whatever he had become, whatever armor he had built, whatever distances he had maintained, whatever version of power he had confused for living. He did not want to be the kind of man that someone like Na Hayes had to feel sorry for. He did not want to be the man in that bed. Not anymore. And that decision, quiet, private, made in a room where no one could see his face, was the most honest thing Adrian Whitmore had done in years. The decision Adrian made on the 8th night was not the kind that announces itself with fanfare. It didn't come with certainty or clean resolution. It came the way most real decisions come, quietly in the dark, when the noise of everything else finally gets too loud to ignore, and the only thing left is the truth you've been trying to outrun. He had made up his mind. But he wasn't ready yet. Not because he was afraid. Adrian Whitmore had not been afraid of anything in a very long time, and even that he was beginning to understand was its own kind of damage. He wasn't ready because he wanted one more day of watching, listening, confirming. Not for the plan. The plan had already delivered everything it promised and more. He wanted one more day for himself. To sit inside the last quiet he might have for a very long time and make sure he understood exactly what he was walking back into, and exactly what he intended to do differently when he got there. That was the thought he fell asleep with on the 8th night. He woke up to Vanessa's voice. She wasn't speaking to him. She was standing near the door phone pressed to her ear, speaking in the clipped corridor, quiet tone she used when she was somewhere public but couldn't wait. "Gerald, I need Harlow's written assessment by end of day tomorrow. Not Friday. Tomorrow." A pause. "I don't care what he needs to feel comfortable. Tell him what comfortable costs and let him decide." Another pause. "Because the board meeting is in 6 days, and I need everything in position before that room fills up. Yes, all of it, including the offshore restructuring." She exhaled short, sharp, the exhale of someone who has been managing too many moving pieces for too long and is beginning to feel the weight of it. "Just get it done." She hung up, turned, looked at Adrian in the bed the way you look at a problem you thought you'd already solved. Then she walked out without a word. She had been in the room for 4 minutes. She had not checked his chart, had not called a nurse, had not touched his hand or said his name or done a single thing that a woman does when she is worried about someone she loves. 4 minutes, a phone call, and she was gone. Adrian lay there and let that sit in him. Let it settle into the place where the last of his doubt had been living. And when it settled, that doubt was gone, completely, finally, without drama or grief, just gone the way a fever breaks in the night and you wake up knowing it's over. Dr. Harlow arrived at 10:15. He was a compact, nervous man, the kind of nervous that hides under professionalism the way rodents hide under floorboards. You didn't see it directly. You heard it in the slightly too fast cadence of his speech, in the way he cleared his throat before making any statement of substance, in the way his eyes moved to the door whenever a conversation started going somewhere he hadn't pre-approved. He came in with a clipboard and the carefully assembled expression of clinical objectivity. He checked the monitors. He reviewed the chart. He did everything a consulting physician is supposed to do in exactly the right order with exactly the right vocabulary. And then he pulled out his pen. He hadn't run a single new test. He hadn't ordered a scan, hadn't reviewed the original neurological workup, hadn't asked Dr. Voss a single question about the patient's baseline or history or response patterns. He had walked in, looked at a man lying in a bed, and was preparing to write a professional assessment of permanent incapacity based on nothing. Based on a phone call from a woman who had told him where she needed the conclusion to land. His pen touched the paper. And from the bed, perfectly still, perfectly controlled, Adrian said quietly, clearly, without raising his voice, even slightly, "I wouldn't do that." Harlow froze. The pen didn't move. His hand didn't move. Nothing in the room moved. Then very slowly, Dr. Harlow turned his head toward the bed. Adrian's eyes were open, fully open, looking directly at him with the calm, unhurried focus of a man who has been watching and waiting and is no longer doing either. Harlow's face went the color of copy paper. Mr. Whitmore." "Don't speak yet," Adrian said, still quiet, still completely controlled. I want you to think very carefully about what you were about to put your signature on, and then I want you to think about what it would mean professionally, legally, personally, if I were to walk out of this hospital today and hand that document to my attorneys." Harlow's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I was asked." "I know what you were asked. I heard the conversation." Adrian's voice hadn't changed pitch or speed by a single degree. "Here is what I'm offering you. You leave this room. You do not sign that assessment. You do not contact Vanessa Caldwell or Gerald Penn. You go back to your practice and you continue your career as though this morning never happened." A pause. "Or you sign it, and I will make certain that this morning is the thing your career is remembered for. Your choice. You have 10 seconds. Harlow didn't need 10 seconds. He capped the pen. He closed the clipboard. He walked to the door with the rapid, rigid movement of a man trying very hard not to run. The door clicked shut behind him. Adrian closed his eyes again, not to perform unconsciousness, but because he needed one single moment of stillness before the next thing. Just one. He took a breath slow and deliberate, the way you take a breath when something just ended and something else is about to begin. Then he opened his eyes, reached for the call button on the side rail of his bed, and pressed it once. When the nurse appeared 30 seconds later, he was sitting up. She stopped in the doorway like she'd walked into a wall. "Please get Dr. Voss," Adrian said. "Tell him it's time." But it wasn't over yet. Not quite. Because Adrian Whitmore was not a man who did things halfway, and he had not staged 9 days of his own disappearance to end it in a hospital room with a rattled physician and a capped pen. The confrontation with Harlow was a reflex necessary, immediate, non-negotiable. But the rest of it, the real ending he had already decided, needed to happen in front of everyone. All of them, at once. He called Dr. Voss. He called Richard. He called his head of security, a former federal agent named Garrett Cole, who had worked for the Whitmore family for 11 years, and who received the call with the specific kind of unsurprised calm that comes from having always suspected this day would come. "Get to the hospital," Adrian said. "Bring Cole. Don't tell anyone else." A pause. "And call my attorneys, both of them. I want them on the phone within the hour." "Are you certain about the timing?" Voss asked. "Vanessa expects Harlow's assessment by end of day, which means she'll be here before tonight. She'll want to see it in person, confirm it's done, move to the next step." Adrian's voice was steady and precise. "Let her come. Let Lucas come with her. Let all of it come." He paused. "I want to be sitting up when they walk in." The hours between that call and 4 o'clock in the afternoon were the strangest of the whole 9 days. Adrian was technically still unconscious. Voss had advised keeping the room status unchanged until the moment itself to prevent any premature tipping off. So Adrian lay there in his bed, fully alert, running through everything in his head with the systematic precision he applied to every significant decision in his life. He thought about the board, about the legal structure, about exactly which accounts Vanessa had already moved conversations around and what reversals would need to happen and in what order. He ran those numbers with the fluency of a man who had built all of it himself and knew every joint and seam in the structure. And then between those calculations, something else kept surfacing. Not in a complicated way, not in the way you think about a problem or a strategy. In the simple, uncomplicated way you think about something true. He kept hearing her voice. Not any single thing she'd said specifically, though he remembered all of it, every word catalogued with the same precision he applied to everything else. It was more the quality of it, the way she spoke in that room, as though the room itself deserved honesty, as though the man in the bed deserved honesty, not because of what he had or who he was, but simply because he was there and he was a person, and that in her understanding of things was enough. He had surrounded himself with people his entire adult life, advisors, partners, employees, associates, and Vanessa, who he had believed was something more than all of them. And not one of those people had spoken to him the way Na had spoken to a man she believed couldn't hear her. That meant something. He wasn't entirely sure yet what to do with it, but it meant something large. At 3:40, Lucas arrived first. He came in the way he always came, smoothly, unhurried, wearing the comfortable confidence of a man who believes a situation is already resolved. He pulled a chair to the far side of the room and sat down, crossing one leg over the other, and looked at Adrian in the bed. "Almost done," he said quietly, to himself, or maybe to Adrian, or maybe to the idea of Adrian, the inconvenient long-running obstacle that was finally mercifully coming to its natural conclusion. He checked his phone, typed something, set it face down on his knee. "You know I actually tried to like you," Lucas said. His voice had an eerie, relaxed quality, the voice of a man in an empty theater speaking to the dark. "When Richard brought your mother into the house, I was 12. I thought maybe this works out. Maybe we become something." He was quiet for a moment, for a betrayal. "But you never let anyone in. Not really. You just let people close enough to be useful." He tilted his head slightly. "So I decided to be useful in a different direction." The door opened. Vanessa came in registered. Lucas gave him a short nod. "Harlow?" she asked. "Haven't heard from him yet." "He should have sent the assessment an hour ago." She pulled out her phone, frowning. "Something's off. He's not answering. Maybe he needed more time to—" "He doesn't need time. He needs a spine, and I provided him one." She typed rapidly. "Gerald, try Harlow directly. Something's wrong." She lowered the phone, looked at Adrian, and in that look, finally after 9 days, something surfaced that might have been feeling. Not love, not grief. Something older and more complicated. Something that looked almost like guilt. Almost. It was gone in 3 seconds. "We're close," she said. To Lucas. To herself. To the room. "We're so close." "Vanessa." The voice came from the bed, not loud, not dramatic, just there, sudden and real and completely unmistakably present. Vanessa turned slowly. The way you turn when you're not sure you heard what you think you heard. The way the body moves when the mind is refusing to catch up. Adrian was sitting up. His eyes were open, clear, fully focused. Looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, not anger, not coldness, not the controlled mask he wore in boardrooms and negotiations. Something more stripped down than any of that. Something that was almost pity. Lucas stood up so fast his chair scraped back against the floor. Vanessa didn't move. She stood completely still, and the phone dropped from her hand, and she stared at him, and the color left her face in a single visible wave, top to bottom, gone like a shade being pulled. "Adrian." Her voice came out wrong, too small, too thin. "Sit down," he said. Neither of them sat. "The assessment from Harlow isn't coming," Adrian said. "He and I had a brief conversation this morning. He made the right choice." He looked at Vanessa steadily. "Gerald Penn will be receiving a call from my attorneys within the next 30 minutes. The offshore restructuring conversations, all of them have already been documented. The board contacts Lucas made also documented. The conversation you had on day 5, Vanessa, in this room while you thought I was unconscious, recorded." The silence that followed was absolute. Vanessa's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Lucas found his voice first. "You how long?" 9 days, Adrian said. "I heard everything. Every phone call, every plan, every conversation about splitting my assets while I was still alive." He paused. "Every moment you stopped pretending you cared whether I lived." Lucas straightened. The charm dropped off his face like a coat he'd just decided he didn't need anymore. Underneath it was something harder and considerably less attractive. "You can't prove—" The door opened. Richard walked in. Behind him came Garrett Cole and 2 members of Adrian's legal team. They arranged themselves in the room with the quiet, unhurried efficiency of people who know exactly why they're there and exactly what comes next. Lucas looked at the attorneys, at Cole, at Richard's face, and then for the first time since Adrian had known him, Lucas Whitmore had absolutely nothing to say. Vanessa was still staring at Adrian. Her expression had moved through shock, through something that flickered briefly toward remorse, and had landed somewhere Adrian recognized calculation. Even now, even here, she was still looking for the angle. "Adrian," she said. Her voice had changed warmer now, softer, pulling on something she thought might still be there. "Whatever you heard, whatever you think you know, I was scared. I was terrified of losing you, and I made bad decisions, and I listened to the wrong people." "Don't," he said. Just that one word, flat and final as a door closing. Her eyes filled. The tears came exactly on cue, exactly the way they'd come on the first day, precise and perfectly timed. He watched them and felt nothing. "I know the difference," Adrian said quietly, "between someone who is afraid of losing me and someone who is afraid of losing what I have." He held her gaze. "I know that difference now in a way I didn't 9 days ago, and that more than anything else in this room is on me." He looked at Cole. "Please escort Ms. Caldwell and Mr. Lucas Whitmore out of this wing. My attorneys will contact both of their legal representatives before end of business today. Nothing in this hospital, nothing in any Whitmore holding, is to be accessed, moved, or discussed by either of them until further notice." Cole moved. 2 security staff appeared as if from the walls. Vanessa took 1 step toward Adrian. 1 step only. "Adrian, please. Goodbye, Vanessa." She was escorted out. Lucas followed stiffly, silently, with the rigid posture of a man who is determined not to appear as diminished as he feels. The room got very quiet. Richard sat down in the chair beside Adrian's bed, the same chair he'd sat in the day before when he'd told his son to pay attention to the maid in the hallway. He set his cane across his knees and looked at his son for a long moment. "Feel better?" he asked. Adrian considered this seriously. "Not yet," he said, "but I will." Richard nodded once. That was enough. And outside in the hallway, completely unaware of what had just unfolded inside that room, Na Hayes was pushing a supply cart toward the far end of the wing, humming something quiet under her breath, about to finish her shift and go home to her 12-year-old son. The boy who had asked her why people get sick. The boy. She had no clean answers for the boy she was raising alone to understand that dignity was not something you earned or purchased or performed. It was something you simply chose, every day, in every room, regardless of who was watching. She had no idea that the man in room 7 had just chosen to start over, and she had no idea that the reason he was able to, the reason he even knew what starting over was supposed to feel like, had everything to do with her. The news moved through the hospital wing the way news always moves through a contained space, fast, distorted, and impossible to stop once it started. By the time Na reached the end of the hallway with her supply cart, 2 nurses were already speaking in the urgent, hushed register of people who have just witnessed something they're not entirely sure they were supposed to see. She caught fragments, a name, the word awake. The sound of someone saying, just sitting up like nothing happened, in the tone people reserve for things they'll be telling for years. She stopped the cart. "What happened?" she asked. The younger nurse, Priya, turned to her with wide eyes. "Room 7, Mr. Whitmore. He woke up. He's fully conscious. He sat up and started talking, and now there are attorneys in the hallway, and security just walked his fiancée out of the building. Walked her out, escorted, like not gently." Na stood there for a moment. Just a moment. Something moved across her face that she didn't have a name for, immediately not quite surprise, not quite the absence of it. Something in between, something that felt strangely like the way a held breath finally releases. "Is he okay?" she asked. Priya blinked. Of everything she might have expected Na to say, that was apparently not it. Yes, he seems completely fine, actually. The doctor is with him now." Na nodded once. She took the cart's handle again. "Good," she said simply, and she kept walking because her shift wasn't finished, and there were 2 other patients at the end of this hallway who needed their afternoon checks, and the fact that the man in room 7 had apparently just detonated his entire personal life in the span of an afternoon was significant and strange, and something she would think about later. Right now she had work to do. That was Na. That had always been Na. Inside room 7, Adrian was doing what he had not done in 9 days, moving. He was out of the bed, standing slightly unsteady in the way of someone whose legs have been still too long, but whose will is absolutely not prepared to acknowledge that. He was on the phone. He was managing 4 conversations in what felt like simultaneous sequence: attorneys, his CFO, his head of operations, a contact at a federal level whose name was never spoken aloud in rooms with more than 2 people. Richard sat in the chair and watched his son work with the expression of a man watching a machine come back online. Pride was in it. So was something more complicated. So was something that looked a great deal like relief. Dr. Voss hovered near the door. Medically, his patient should have been resting. Medically, 9 days of performed unconsciousness had placed genuine physiological demands on a body, regardless of the fact that the unconsciousness itself was staged. He had opinions about all of this. He kept them to himself, because Adrian had not asked for them, and because he had worked with this family long enough to know exactly when his opinions would land and when they would simply ricochet. "The Meridian account?" Adrian said into the phone. "Yes, freeze it, today. Before close of business, not after before." A pause. "I don't care what explanation Penn's office gives. Nothing moves until my team has reviewed every transaction from the last 14 days. Every one." He listened for a moment. His jaw tightened. "How much?" Another pause shorter. "Fine. Reverse it. All of it. And get me a name. I want to know whose signature is on those transfer authorizations." He hung up. Turned to Richard. "She moved 43% of the Meridian liquidity into a holding account registered under Penn's firm," he said, flat, factual. The emotion had been sealed somewhere beneath the logistics, because that was how Adrian had always worked. Feel it later, handle it now. "She started the transfers on day 2. Richard was quiet for a moment. "Day 2, he repeated. "The day after she brought Penn into the hospital." Adrian set the phone down on the bedside table. She wasn't waiting for Harlow's assessment to start moving. She was already moving. The assessment was just the legal cover she needed to finish. Can it be recovered? All of it. Penn's firm doesn't have the clearance to complete those transfers without additional sign-off that was never going to come from my side, because she forgot that 2 of those accounts require dual authorization. He almost smiled. Almost. She spent 9 days planning and forgot that one detail. "People who think they've won stop checking their work," Richard said. "Yes, they do." Garrett Cole returned 20 minutes later with a look on his face that Adrian read immediately. Not alarm, but the specific, controlled expression Cole used when something unexpected had added itself to an already complicated situation. "What?" Adrian said. "Lucas," Cole said. "He didn't leave the building." A beat of silence. "Where is he?" "Waiting room on the 2nd floor. He told security he wanted to speak with you before he left. Said it was personal." Cole paused. "He's been sitting there for 40 minutes. He's not making calls. He's not on his phone at all. He's just sitting." Adrian looked at Cole for a moment. Then at Richard. Richard said nothing. But something shifted in his expression. Something that was neither endorsement nor warning. Something that was perhaps curiosity. "Bring him up," Adrian said. Cole raised one eyebrow by approximately 2 millimeters, which for Cole was the equivalent of a full dramatic reaction. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Lucas came in 3 minutes later. He came in differently than he ever had before, without the smooth entrance, without the arranged expression, without any of the careful costuming of casualness he'd worn throughout the 9 days. He came in the way a man comes into a room when he has finally stopped performing and doesn't entirely know what to do with his face now that the performance is over. He stood near the door, looked at Adrian standing beside the bed phone in hand, steady and awake and fully devastatingly present. "I'm not here to negotiate," Lucas said. "I know. And I'm not here to apologize, not in a way that would mean anything to you." "I know that too." Lucas was quiet for a moment. Something worked in his face, something genuine and uncomfortable and unfamiliar to both of them. "I need you to know that none of it was—" He stopped. Started again. "I told myself a story. That you'd built everything on the family name and the family money, and that what was Whitmore was equally mine. I told myself that story for 15 years, and I told it long enough that it stopped feeling like a lie." Adrian said nothing. He waited. That was one of the things he had always done better than anyone in any room wait. "I don't know if that's an explanation or an excuse," Lucas continued. "I'm not sure there's a difference anymore." He looked at his stepbrother directly for what might have been the first time in years. "But I want you to know that the night you collapsed before I knew it was staged, there was about an hour where I felt something real. Before Vanessa called me. before the plan clicked back in. He paused. For about an hour, I was just scared. That you were gone. Actually, gone. The room was completely silent. 1 hour, Adrian said finally. 1 hour, Lucas confirmed with no attempt to make it sound like more than it was. Adrian looked at him for a long moment, and then he said something that surprised both of them. That's more than I expected. He turned back to this table, picked up his phone. My attorneys will still be in contact. The board matter will still be investigated. I can't undo what's already been set in motion, and I wouldn't because what you did required a response, and it's going to get one. Lucas nodded. But I'm not going to pretend the hour didn't happen, Adrian said. I heard enough in 9 days to know who people really are. That hour is part of who you really are. Lucas stood there. He didn't say thank you, there was nothing to thank anyone for, and he was smart enough to know it. He just nodded once and left, and the door closed behind him with a quietness that felt nothing like the door closing on Vanessa had felt. That door had felt like an ending. This one felt like something unresolved, which was, Adrian thought, probably accurate. At 5:30 in the afternoon, Adrian was officially discharged from the private wing with a clean neurological report signed by Dr. Voss, who had maintained a perfectly straight face through the entire examination and would continue to maintain it for the rest of his professional career. The hospital administrator, a flustered man named Douglas, appeared to ask whether Adrian had any complaints about his stay that he'd like formally documented. Adrian looked at him. The care in this wing was excellent, he said, particularly the afternoon staff. Douglas blinked. I'll pass that along. Please do. He was gathering the last of the items from the bedside table when Richard appeared at the door again, coat on ready to leave, but pausing in the way he paused when he had something to say and was arranging it. The maid, Richard said. Nah, Hayes. Is she still on shift? Adrian's hand stilled briefly on the table. I don't know. Garrett could find out. I know he could. Richard waited. Adrian picked up his watch from the table, turned it over in his hand once, set it back down. I don't want the first conversation to happen like this, he said. Me just out of a hospital bed, half my legal team in the hallway, the whole thing. It's not... He stopped. Not what? Richard asked. Adrian looked for the word. It took him a moment, which almost never happened. Not honest, he said finally. It's not honest enough. Richard considered this. Then he picked up his cane, straightened, and said, That's the first time I've heard you use that word about yourself. He left. Adrian stood there alone in the room for a moment. The room that had been his theater, his controlled experiment, his proof of everything he'd suspected and feared, and ultimately confirmed. He looked at the bed, at the chair beside it where Na had sat more than once, and spoken into the room as though the room itself deserved the truth. He picked up his watch, put it on, buttoned his cuff, walked out. The hallway was a different world now. His attorneys were on phones. Cole was coordinating with his driver. 2 board members who had apparently been notified and had driven to the hospital in something close to a panic were being managed by his CFO with the diplomatic precision of someone diffusing something. He moved through all of it efficiently, answering what needed answering, deflecting what didn't, and keeping one part of his attention, a quiet, persistent part, on the faces of the staff he passed. Nurses, aides, orderlies. He saw Priya first. She saw him coming and went very still the way junior staff go still when powerful people walk toward them. Ms. He caught the name badge. Priya. Is Na Hayes still in the building? Priya stared at him. Yes. She's finishing her notes in the staff room. She stays late sometimes to... She stopped. Is everything okay? Yes, he said. Thank you. He kept moving. The staff room was at the end of the wing, a plain, practical space that smelled of coffee and paper. The door was half open. He stopped outside it. Through the gap he could see Na at the table writing in a logbook with the focused, unhurried attention she brought to everything. She hadn't heard him. She wasn't performing anything. She was just there, present, real, exactly the same as she'd been every single time she came into his room, which was the entire point, which was everything. He knocked on the open door. She looked up. The recognition moved across her face in stages. First, just a man in a doorway, Then the face that matched the face she'd been seeing horizontal and still for 9 days, and then the full, almost disorienting comprehension that he was standing and awake and looking directly at her. She stood up. Her chair scraped back. "Mr. Whitmore." "Adrian," he said. She stopped. "Please," he said. "Just Adrian." Na looked at him for a moment. And then, because she was Na, and because Na did not perform composure, she simply had it. She said, "Are you all right?" He almost laughed. Of everything she could have said, of all the reactions available to a woman who had just discovered that the man she'd been speaking honestly to for 9 days had heard every word she asked if he was all right. "I've been better," he said, "and I've been considerably worse." He paused. I needed to say something to you before I left." She waited. She did it the way he waited, without filling the space, without prompting, without performing patience. She just waited. "I heard you," he said. "Everything you said in that room. Every time." He held her gaze steadily. "About your father, about your son, about dignity and what it means to treat a person like a person regardless of what else they are." He paused. "I want you to know that it mattered. In a way that's going to be difficult to explain properly, it changed something." Na was quiet for a moment. Something moved in her expression, not surprise exactly, but a kind of careful reckoning, the look of someone absorbing information that is large and requires space. "You were awake," she said. "Yes." "The whole time?" "Yes." She looked at him, and then, and this was the thing he had not anticipated, the thing that undid him more completely than anything Vanessa or Lucas had done in 9 days, she didn't react with shock. She didn't react with embarrassment or violation or any of the things that would have been entirely reasonable. She just nodded, slowly, and said, "I meant all of it." He stood there. "Every word," she said. "I would have said it whether you could hear or not. That's just how I work." He believed her. He believed her completely and immediately, in the way you believe things that don't require evidence because the evidence has been accumulating in front of you for days. "I know," he said. And then, because he was a man still learning how to be honest in real time, and because he had decided alone in a hospital room in the quiet that he was done doing things halfway, he said the next thing, the harder thing. "I'd like to see you again. Not here, not like this." He registered the inadequacy of his own words and pressed through it. "I want to have a conversation, a real one, where I'm not in a hospital bed and you're not on a shift, and neither of us is performing anything for anyone." Na looked at him for a long moment. "That's a very complicated thing you're asking," she said. "I know. I clean floors in a building owned by people like you. You understand that's the reality." "I understand that's the situation. I don't think that's the reality." She studied him. Nah, Hayes had spent 6 years working in a wing full of people at their most vulnerable, their most stripped down, their most honest. And she had developed the specific unsentimental clarity that comes from witnessing that much unguarded human truth. She was not easily fooled. She did not want to be flattered, and she could read with considerable accuracy the difference between a man saying what he meant and a man saying what he thought she wanted to hear. She read him. She took a breath. "I get off at 6, she said finally. "I always stop for coffee at the place on Meridian before I take the train. I'm there for about 20 minutes. It was not a yes. It was not an invitation. It was simply a piece of true information offered without strings to a man who had just asked for honesty. He understood exactly what it was. "Meridian," he said. "On Meridian," she confirmed. She sat back down, opened her logbook, picked up her pen. Adrian stood in the doorway for one more moment, and then he turned, walked back down the hallway through his attorneys and his security and his CFO and every complicated machinery of his recovered life, and he felt something he did not have immediate vocabulary for. It took him until he reached the elevator to identify it. Simple, unfamiliar, almost frightening in its quietness. Hope. The coffee place on Meridian was called Dora's. It had 12 tables, a handwritten menu board, and coffee that came in cups so large they required 2 hands. It was the kind of place that had been in the same spot for 30 years, because the neighborhood had changed around it, and it simply hadn't bothered to change with it, which was, depending on how you looked at it, either stubbornness or integrity. Adrian arrived at 5:53. He had sent Cole home, sent the attorneys back to their offices with instructions and a timeline, sent his CFO a message that said, "Handle it," in a tone that everyone in his organization understood meant exactly that and nothing more. He had done all of this in the car on the way over efficiently without drama, because the logistics of his recovered life required attention, and he was not a man who deferred necessary things. But the reason he arrived at 5:53, 7 minutes early, which was not a thing Adrian Whitmore did ever for anyone, was not logistics. He sat at a table near the window. He ordered coffee he didn't particularly want. He sat with his hands around the cup and he waited, and the waiting felt different from 9 days of performed stillness in a hospital bed. That waiting had been controlled, strategic, armored. This was just waiting, plain and unprotected and slightly uncomfortable in the way that honest things often are when you're not used to them. At 6:04, Na walked in. She had changed out of her work clothes. She was wearing a dark coat over a simple sweater, her bag over one shoulder, her hair different from how it looked under the hospital wing's lighting, softer somehow. More like herself, though he was aware he didn't yet fully know what herself looked like outside of that room. She saw him immediately, didn't hesitate at the door, walked directly to the table and sat down across from him, the way she did everything without performance, without preamble. "You're early," she said. "I am. I almost didn't come." He looked at her. "What changed your mind?" She considered this seriously, which he was already learning was what she did before she said anything that mattered. "You said a real conversation," she said. "I've been in that wing 6 years. Real conversations are rarer than people think, even in a place where people are supposed to be honest with each other." She folded her hands on the table. "I decided rare was worth 20 minutes. Just 20 minutes. We'll see about the rest." The coffee came. She ordered tea. And then she looked at him with the direct, unhurried attention he recognized from every time she'd stood at the foot of his bed, and she said the thing he had been expecting and dreading in roughly equal measure. "Tell me why you did it." He didn't pretend not to understand. "The coma." "Yes." He wrapped both hands around his cup. Thought about how to say it, not the strategic version, not the version he would have given a board or an attorney, but the actual version. The true one, the one that didn't make him look particularly wise or controlled or in command of anything. "I stopped trusting my own judgment," he said, "about people, about what was real and what was being performed for my benefit." He paused. "I had a fiancée who said the right things, and a stepbrother who acted the right way, and a circle of people who reflected back exactly the version of events I was supposed to believe." He looked at his cup. "And somewhere in the last 2 years I started to feel it's something false underneath all of it, but I couldn't locate it. I couldn't find the specific thing I could point to and say there. That's the lie." "So you manufactured a situation where people would stop performing," Na said. "Yes, and it worked. Faster than I expected." He said it without satisfaction. Vanessa was on the phone with her attorney by day 3. Lucas never even came into the room. He was quiet for a moment. "Which meant that everything I suspected was true, which should have felt like vindication. But it didn't." "No." He looked at her directly. "It felt like loss. Because even when you're right about a thing like that, even when the proof is exactly as complete as you needed it to be, it still means that the 2 years before, it were not what you believed they were. And that's not vindication. That's just damage." Confirmed. Na was quiet. She wrapped her hands around her tea. She didn't offer comfort, didn't rush to fill the silence with reassurance, didn't perform sympathy. She just sat with what he'd said and let it exist in the space between them. "That took courage to say," she said finally. "It took 9 days of lying in a hospital bed," he replied. "Sometimes that's what courage requires." He asked about her father, the one she'd mentioned, the one in the hospital bed, the one her family had talked to every day not knowing if he could hear. Something shifted in her face. Not pain exactly. Something more settled than pain. Something that had been through pain and come out the other side without losing its shape. "He made it," she said. "He was in that bed for 3 weeks and then he came back. Not fully, he was different after. Slower. but present. She paused. He died 4 years later. Heart. Nothing dramatic. He just went. I'm sorry. Don't be. He had 4 years we almost didn't get. We used them. She looked at her tea. That's what I mean when I say you treat people like they're still in there, because they usually are. And the time you spend acting like they're already gone is time you don't get back. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Is that what you thought about when you came into my room? Every time. Even knowing who I was. What I ran. She looked at him squarely. I told you in that room. It didn't change how I showed up. A person is a person before they're a title. She paused. That's not a philosophy I came up with. That's just what my grandmother taught me and what I've watched be true every single day I've worked in that wing. He looked at her, and then he said what he'd been carrying since the moment she'd walked in. The thing underneath all the other things. I want to ask you something, and I need you to understand that I'm not asking it the way I ask things in a boardroom. I'm not positioning it. I'm not working toward a conclusion I've already reached. He stopped. I'm asking because I genuinely don't know the answer, and you're the only person I can imagine asking. Na waited. Do you think a person can actually change? He said. Not adjust, not strategize differently, actually change the fundamental way they move through the world, what they let in, what they protect, what they value. He held her gaze. Or is it always just the same person making slightly different choices? She didn't answer immediately. She thought about it, really thought about it, in the way that showed on her face a slight tension around the eyes, the particular quality of a mind actually working, rather than retrieving something preformed. My son, she said. He was angry for a long time after his father left. 7, 8 years old, angry in this deep, quiet way that was worse than the loud kind because it didn't go anywhere. It just sat in him. She paused. I watched him decide one day to let a kid at school sit with him at lunch, a new kid nobody was talking to, and I don't know why he did it that day and not any other day. He couldn't explain it either. She looked at Adrian. But after that day he was different. Not fixed, not resolved, just pointed in a different direction. One lunch, Adrian said. One choice. That led to the next one. That led to the next. She paused. I think that's what change actually looks like. Not a moment of transformation. Just a direction you choose and then keep choosing. He sat with that. I'm going to need to keep choosing, he said. Yes, she agreed. You are. They stayed at Dora's for 1 hour and 40 minutes. Not 20, not the cautious provisional 20 she had offered at the door. 1 hour and 40 during which the coffee went cold and got replaced and went cold again, during which the table around them gradually emptied as the after-work crowd thinned out, during which they talked about things that had nothing to do with hospitals or empires or betrayal. She told him about her son Marcus, 12, obsessed with building things constantly underfoot in the kitchen when she was trying to cook recently, and inexplicably fascinated by the history of bridges. She told him with the specific warmth of a parent who finds their child genuinely interesting, not just lovable, who sees a person there, not just a responsibility. He told her about Richard, about the complicated architecture of growing up in a house with a father who showed love through standards and silence, and the occasional unexpected moment of clarity that hit harder than any direct declaration could have. About spending decades building towards something that was supposed to feel like a rival, and always somehow feeling like more preparation. For what? She asked. I didn't know, he said. I think that was the problem. She nodded. Like that made sense to her. Like it was a recognizable human experience and not a confession of failure. That the simple fact of being understood without being managed sat in his chest with a weight he hadn't expected. It was Richard who called at 7:45. Adrian looked at the phone, looked at Na across the table. She made a small gesture answer it with the easy grace of someone who doesn't require undivided attention to feel secure. He answered. The board called an emergency session, Richard said. Tomorrow morning, they want you present. Of course they do. Vanessa's attorney also sent a formal letter this evening. She's contesting the asset freeze on the grounds of... Richard paused, and Adrian could hear the specific quality of his father's disdain, even through the compression of a phone call. Emotional duress. She's claiming the staged coma constitutes a form of psychological manipulation. Adrian was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, get me Marcus Hale on the phone tonight and pull every recording from the hospital audio relay, every conversation, every call, every word. I want a complete transcript in my attorney's hands before 9 a.m. Already in motion, Richard said. I called Hale an hour ago. Of course you did. There's one more thing. Richard's voice shifted just slightly. The shift that meant what was coming was not logistical. The board is going to ask questions about your judgment, about the staged event. Some of them are going to use words like erratic and unstable, and they're going to be watching your face when they do. I know. They're going to try to use it against you. I know that too. And Adrian looked across the table at Na, who was looking out the window with the patient, self-contained quality of someone comfortable in their own presence. She wasn't listening to his call. She wasn't angling toward it. She was just there, occupying her own space without needing to fill his. And I'm not the same person I was 11 days ago, Adrian said. So let them try. Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said with the precise brevity of a man who has learned exactly when to stop talking, "Good." He hung up. Na looked back from the window. Everything okay? There's a board meeting tomorrow. Legal challenges, the usual aftermath. He set the phone down. It's going to be complicated for a while. Is that your way of warning me about something? He looked at her. It's my way of being honest about what I'm walking back into, and what being connected to me would look like from the outside. He paused. I'm not going to pretend that's simple. She looked at him for a long moment. You know what I notice about you, she said. Tell me. You keep giving me exits. You keep laying out every reason why this is complicated or risky or not what it seems. She tilted her head slightly. Most men in your position would be going the other direction. Most men in my position haven't spent 9 days in a hospital bed listening to what people really think, he said. I'd rather give you accurate information and let you make an actual choice. That's different, she said. I'm trying to be. She looked at him steadily, and then she said something that landed in him like the first solid thing after a long fall. I know you are, she said. I can tell the difference. He walked her to the train station. Not because she asked him to, not because it was strategic, because they were still talking, and neither of them had found a natural place to stop, and the night air was cold and the walk was 4 blocks, and it was simply the thing that made sense. At the top of the station steps, she stopped and turned. Marcus has a school thing on Saturday, she said. He's presenting a project on the Chicago River bridges. He's been working on it for 3 months, and he's terrified. She paused. I'm bringing him breakfast at that diner on Lakeview before it starts. If you were free, the bridges thing apparently has a lot to do with engineering decisions made by people with money and power, and he has a lot of questions I can't answer. It was not a declaration. It was not even technically an invitation. It was a piece of true information offered without pressure to a man she was choosing carefully, provisionally, with eyes wide open to let a little further in. He understood exactly what it was. What time? He said. 8:30. I'll be there. She nodded once, went down the steps, didn't look back, not because she was performing indifference, but because she was Na, and Na didn't perform anything, and she had said what she meant and meant what she said, and the rest would be what it would be. He stood at the top of the steps until the station swallowed her. The board meeting the next morning lasted 4 hours. They used the words Richard had predicted: erratic, destabilizing, reputational risk. A man named Philip Coates, who had been on the Whitmore board for 9 years and whose loyalty had always been calibrated precisely to his self-interest, led the charge with the specific aggressive confidence of someone who has prepared his argument carefully and believes the room is with him. Adrian let him finish. Let the full argument complete itself. Let it sit in the room for a moment. Then he opened the folder in front of him and slid copies of the hospital audio transcripts to every person at the table. All 18 of them. The full documentation of every conversation Vanessa and Lucas had conducted during his 9 days, every plan, every transfer instruction, every casual reference to his death as a scheduling matter. He let them read. The room got very quiet. I staged a coma, Adrian said, when he judged they'd had enough time. Because I had credible reason to believe that people with legal and operational access to this company were planning to use my incapacity, real or manufactured, to dismantle everything this board is responsible for protecting. He looked around the table slowly. I was right. The documentation in front of you confirms it in detail. The question before this board is not whether my method was unconventional. The question is what you intend to do about the people who were planning to hand your interest to a dead man's fiancée and a stepbrother whose primary qualification is proximity. Philip Coates had stopped talking. The board voted 2 hours later, 14-4, in Adrian's favor. Vanessa's legal challenge was met with the full transcript as counter-evidence and collapsed within 72 hours. Gerald Penn quietly withdrew from her representation and from active practice for what his office described as personal reasons, and what everyone who knew him understood was a careful, preemptive exit from a situation that had nowhere good to go. Lucas did not contest anything. He hired a quiet attorney, negotiated a clean exit from his subsidiary interests, and left Chicago for a city that wasn't discussed in Whitmore circles. Whether the hour of genuine fear Adrian had acknowledged had meant anything in the long run, whether it had pointed Lucas in any different direction, was something only time would answer. Adrian didn't know. He found to his own mild surprise that he was able to hold that uncertainty without needing to resolve it. That was new. On Saturday morning at 8:27, Adrian Whitmore walked into a diner on Lakeview and found a 12-year-old boy with serious eyes and a poster tube under his arm, sitting across from his mother, explaining the structural load capacity of the Chicago River's bascule bridges with the focused intensity of someone who has been thinking about this for a very long time and is relieved to finally have an audience. Na looked up when he came in. She didn't smile immediately. She wasn't a woman who performed reactions. But something in her face settled, shifted, made room. "Marcus," she said. "This is Adrian." Marcus looked up from his notes, assessed the newcomer with the frank, unsentimental appraisal of a 12-year-old who has been raised by a woman who doesn't waste time on pretense. "Do you know anything about counterweights?" Marcus asked. Adrian sat down. "Tell me what you know first." Marcus opened his folder, and for the next 40 minutes, Adrian Whitmore, who had built a financial empire, staged his own disappearance, exposed a conspiracy, recovered his company, and learned at considerable personal cost. The difference between power and worth, sat in a diner booth and listened to a boy explain how bridges are built to hold the weight of everything that crosses them. He listened the way Na had taught him to listen, like the person speaking deserved his full, unhurried attention. Like what they were saying mattered not because of what it could give him, but simply because it was real, and it was theirs, and that was enough. Marcus noticed. Kids always do. "You're actually listening," Marcus said with the slightly suspicious tone of someone unaccustomed to it. "I am," Adrian said. Marcus looked at his mother. Something passed between them, the wordless, specific language of two people who know each other completely. Na said nothing, but the corner of her mouth moved. Marcus went back to his bridges, and Adrian understood, sitting in that booth with cold coffee and a boy's careful drawing spread across the table between them, that this was what he had been building toward without knowing it. Not the empire, not the recovered authority, not the vindication. This ordinary, irreplaceable, completely unarmored moment. He had spent his whole life accumulating power so that no one could take anything from him. It turned out the only things worth having were the ones that couldn't be taken in the first place.